My first sight of Srila Prabhupada was in Detroit in 1971 when he arrived at the airport. I had come there with Hari Griva and Kirtananda from New Vrindavan, and we welcomed Prabhupada. As he came out of the jetway, there was about 350 devotees welcoming him. And the moment that he stepped out of the door into our sight, everyone began to cry. There was a wave of transcendental emotion that just went throughout the entire room, and anyone who was there will remember it. The next thing I remember was Prabhupada sitting down in that lounge, and the first words out of his mouth were, "You are not that body." And they just pierced my heart, along with everybody else's there. And Jaduma Swami and I always mention it to each other that we recall that one moment as being so extraordinary for everybody. And then he was driven back to the temple, and I spent the next 3 hours crying my heart out, being relieved, knowing my spiritual father had come back to once again try to extract me from the material world. And that was my first experience of Prabhupada. So I went from New Vrindavan to New York, where I began a service at the press. I started making a film on the Bhagavad-gita with animation, and I was also distributing magazines in the subways and doing Harinam. And I was also hearing Prabhupada's lectures at that time, because he was there saying, eat less, sleep less, these material necessities are something we can reduce. And I took it as gospel, and that's what I did. I would, refuse to eat more than one chapati at a meal, or have more than one cup of dal, or, have more one serving, whatever's put on my plate of sabji, and that was it. And at that time, we didn't get any sweets unless it was Sunday. So Prabhupada, meanwhile, noticed me amongst the devotees listening to his lectures, unknown to me. And years later, I found out that he told Karandar, "Who is this young boy? Please make sure he gets more prasadam." So, the following days at the temple, devotees were coming up to me during lunch, and they were saying, "Would you like my chapati? Would you like, I can give you some of my dal?" And I was thinking, this is how Maya works. She comes at you like this, and she's just tempting you. But Prabhupada's saying, no, eat less, sleep less. I was down to 4 hours, a night of sleep. And so I would say, no, thank you very much, because I saw, this is Maya working. Meanwhile, my aunt came to New York, and she saw me at the temple. She came over, and she noticed that I was very thin, and she was alarmed, and so she called my mother in Chicago. And by the time my mother had made arrangements to come to New York, because she was worried, to actually check out the situation, I had lost even more weight. I was now down to 108 pounds from 180. And after some time there, some letters started arriving on a regular basis, 2 or 3 or 4 a week, to Srila Prabhupada from my mother, asking about my welfare and holding him responsible for the fact that I had become so sick, even though it was my own undoing in the New York temple and my own state of consciousness that had gotten it that way. So Karandar became concerned. He was the temple president, because he had gotten wind of what had happened to the incense business in New York based on the, hell hath no fury like my mother's wrath, when she sees her son being somehow not taken care of properly. And so he approached me after a few months in LA and said that he felt it was better if I left and went home instead of serving. And I said, but Prabhupada's instructions are that association of devotees should never be given up. Otherwise, you will definitely fall into Maya, and it would be very difficult to return. And he was insistent that I leave, and for the first time in my devotional life, I was insistent that I would not leave. So the next morning, he came to me and said that Srila Prabhupada wanted to see me. And I was very fearful, because I said, oh my God, what have I done wrong? I've obviously, the first time now, I've said no to a temple authority, and immediately Prabhupada wants to see me. And of course, it's all mercy, but at the time I was pretty frightened as I walked up those steps to his quarters. I'd never been up there before. I'd never been even on one of his morning walks. I always felt that, that the whole idea of in separation from the spiritual master was a higher principle. So I was always in the kitchen cleaning pots, or something like that. So here I was entering his room, and he was taking prasadam. And I offer my obeisances, and he looks up at me, and he's got these big compassionate eyes. And I have no idea what he's thinking. And he says, so, there's some difficulty with your mother. And, you know, I don't disagree with the spiritual master. I agree with him. So I said, yes, Prabhupada. And he said, she wants you to go home for some time. I said, yes, she does, Prabhupada. He said, so you can go home for some time? No, I'm not going to say no. I said, yes, but I was really worried. I said, what is Prabhupada, you know, thinking? You know, I'm not supposed to leave this temple or this association. And then he said, I'm going to give you this name. I'm going to initiate you with the name Nrsimhananda Das. And that way, you'll always be protected from your parents. And then you can go home some time and come back. I was stunned. Then his hand came from the plate with some prasad. Here, take. And he put this prasadam into my hand. And I took the prasadam and he said, so then, you can eat vegetarian at home? And I said, yes, Prabhupada. He said, then what is the difficulty? And with that, I paid my obeisances. I went out, my name was entered in the book according to the secretary, and I was making arrangements to go back to Chicago, where when I arrived at the airport, you know, one sister grabbed one arm and one sister grabbed another, and I saw them like two Maya Devis taking me away from devotees. And I was bewildered. How could the spiritual master be sending me away? But in due course of time, the experience that I had was that Prabhupada had shown compassion not just to me and to what my needs were, but also to my mother. He wasn't operating out of fear of anything that was happening. He was genuinely understanding what was best for the situation. And the proof is that, you know, I came back and rejoined devotional service and began to, you know, make films for Krishna and do exactly what in his letters he had recommended me to do. And meanwhile, my mother was satisfied because I'd come home and I'd, you know, shown that I could live a regular material life while chanting and carrying on with things. I think I was one of the first devotees to actually live at home for a while, have a job, and still be initiated. And when I came back in good standing and was able to carry on. What it showed me was that Prabhupada knew, according to time and circumstance, exactly what to do, despite what the scriptures may say. The job of the spiritual master is to give proper guidance. And nobody had greater understanding or compassion than Srila Prabhupada, because he knew past, present, and future. That was his potency. And those of us who experienced it and how it entered into us, we really realized that Prabhupada indeed he was a Vaikuntha man. He wasn't an ordinary mortal. And to this day, I'll never forget the look in his eyes. He looked at me. His eyes were so deep. They had such a sense of not just compassion, but sympathy for my situation. He knew it wasn't going to be easy. He tried to make it easy. He gave me a name that made it easy. You know, with that name, I knew, okay, I may have difficulty, but I got the name Nrsimhananda. I'm always going to be protected. And as it turns out, my mother ended up, though she went in the direction for some time of joining the anti-cult movement and making sure that other people were not taken advantage of, and we know that in many cults, a lot of people were taken advantage of by unscrupulous leadership. But in our case, and even in our own movement, we had our own problems amongst our own leaders. But in the case of Srila Prabhupada, he made that instruction in such a way that I was able to come through that. My mother was able to work her way through that over the years. And in 1999, she came with me to Vrindavan, celebrated her birthday, sat at the feet of Prabhupada's Murti, saw his samadhi, paid her respects. You know, it was a beautiful trip. And to me, it was the ultimate affirmation that Prabhupada's compassion could carry anyone over the ocean of doubt and illusion. It was a fantastic moment for me to have her there in Vrindavan amongst the devotees. And she loved it. She said, this was the best trip I ever took in my life, the month she spent with me in India. It was very rewarding.